Hello everyone, welcome! Today I'm going to be revisiting one of my favorite stamp sets from the Scrappy Tails Crafts Shop. This is called Popping Poppies, and it's just the most beautifully illustrated stamp set in my opinion. I'm going to be doing one of my very favorite techniques to do. This is called background stamping or pattern stamping. I'm going to be stamping on a few pieces of colored cardstock. These are from Spellbinders, and I'm using persimmon, saffron, and poppy field. We'll start with the persimmon orangey cardstock. And I'm just selecting one stamp and the leaf dies to go along with it. Since I am going to heat emboss these, I will start by adding anti-static powder to this panel. I'm stamping with VersaFine Onyx Black ink, which is a nice, sticky, wet ink. This stays wet long enough to pour the clear embossing powder onto it. So I'm going to stamp this one flower over this whole panel, and I make sure that I turn the stamping block so that the flowers face all different directions. I'm leaving a little bit of space so that I can stamp some leaves. And then once I'm done, I am going to pour over the clear embossing powder and heat set this before I stamp my leaves. I have already stamped and cut out several masks. You can see it there in the top left-hand corner, but I stamped it on a piece of Post-it note, and then I can pull off about 5 at a time and cut it all at once. It makes it really fast and easy to cut out a bunch of masks. Now I'm going to allow my heat tool to warm up, and then I can melt this panel. But I really love poppy stamps. I don't know what there is about poppies that I just love. And as I said before, these are just so beautifully drawn. The images turn nice and black and shiny once the embossing powder has melted. I put all of the masks on the flowers at the top of this panel. Now I can stamp the leaves, and this will make it appear as though the leaves are coming from behind the flowers. This onyx black ink can be pretty messy. And I'm just filling up all of the extra space. Now I can shift the masks down and do some more stamping. And then once this panel is completely covered with my images, I'll pour on more of the clear embossing powder. I'll use my tweezers to peel these masks off so that I don't get ink on this panel. Look how pretty that is. You could just call it done right there, but I am going to take this a step further, as you'll see here in just a minute. But let's pour over the clear embossing powder. And I'm just covering the leaves, of course. I'm going to have to stop here and funnel this powder back into the little bottle. This used to be a very full bottle, but I spilt it one day. Otherwise, this stuff really lasts me forever. But I'm going to have to buy another bottle here soon. Okay, so there are the leaves all coated. Now I can melt them. It's just, I leave this in because it's fun, at least for me, to see the embossing powder melt and turn shiny and bright. So I did create a card using this stamp set a few months ago, and I will link to that video at the end of this video. In that video, I stamped the large heart image with the poppies around it, and I colored it in with colored pencils, but I had a lot of fun with that image too. Now let's move on to the second stamp. This one has a little stem and leaf attached to it. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to twist this stamp around and keep stamping. I did have a little bit of a gap there at the top right, as you see, but I decided just to cover that up with my sentiment, so it won't be a problem. Otherwise, that would really bother me. So let's pour the clear embossing powder over this one. After using this embossing powder on these cards, I think I do need to get a Tupperware and just keep it in the Tupperware. I think it would save me a lot of time and mess. So you'll probably see that in my next video. I'm going to change up how I do this. I see a lot of crafters use Tupperwares, and I don't know why I don't pick up their ideas, but this time I will. So let's melt these images. I'll flip it around so that I don't burn my fingers. And this one is all ready to go. I'm going to set this one aside and do my third panel with the third poppy image. And I did treat all three panels with anti-static powder. I just didn't show it all 3 times. Okay, let's pour over more of the clear embossing powder. It looks so gray once you pour it on, but it melts so black and nice. With the coloring technique that I'm going to do, it helps to stamp your images on a piece of colored cardstock because it just gives you a base to start adding more color to. So I am going to pull out my Distress Oxide inks to quickly color in these images. Let's do a little more stamping on this panel. I decided these needed some leaves too. So I did the same thing. I stamped it once onto a pad of Post-it note paper, and this is the full sticky back Post-it note paper. And then I cut them all out in one cutting. Let's pull off these masks. And pour over the embossing powder. Last time, I will be heat embossing my sentiments when it comes time for that, but I do cut that out of the video just because you probably have seen enough embossing so far in this video. So let's melt the leaves. And for my sentiments, I used all of the sentiments. They're all so clever. I love stamp sets that come with unique and clever sentiments. Scrappy Tails Crafts has a stamp set called Oops-a-Daisy. And check that one out. I'll link to it below, but it has the cutest sentiments in that. Okay, so here are all 3 panels. I'm going to start, of course, with the first panel, the persimmon cardstock. And I'm using some crackling campfire. This is one of my favorite Distress Oxide inks, and it just puts down the most beautiful orange color on this cardstock. I want to add to the color at the centers of these flowers and then just where the shadows would be. And then I can buff off the excess of ink and rub it off of the black lines so it doesn't dull my lines. I'll speed this up, but this was so fast and fun to do. So if you don't feel like coloring, this is the way to go. It just adds a nice pop of orange to this panel. I'll buff off the images with my tissue, and then I'm going to use a little bit of crushed olive for the leaves, and I'm not covering up the whole leaf or the whole image. I want a lot of the cardstock to show through. I'm just kind of tapping it in. If I go out of the lines, that doesn't bother me, but I just want a little indication of color. But look what that brings to this panel, that little pop of green. It's nice to have small makeup brushes like this in your stash. I don't often use them, but they sure came in handy this time. So I'll just tap in the color, and then I can just go ahead and buff off the excess of ink. So how many of you have purchased the new Distress ink color, the Salvaged Patina? I have, and I haven't used it yet, but I'm really excited to give it a try. I've been really loving all these new colors that Tim Holtz has been coming out with, especially the Kitsch Flamingo. Okay, here's the panel all done. Now let's move on to the saffron panel. I'm using the Kitsch Flamingo on this, and it just looks lovely over this yellow cardstock. I'll buff off the excess. That really makes a big difference. I'll speed this up. And again, this just makes for some really fast coloring. I cleaned off my brush by rubbing it on a baby wipe in between the orange and the pink. And then I'm using Twisted Citron for the leaves. I had a long makeup brush, and it just fit perfectly within the lines of the stem. Now for my third panel, I'm going to use some unicorn white pigment ink. This goes on really bright. It's just a beautiful ink, but then I buff it off and it mutes it down just a little bit. But isn't that pretty? I didn't really have an ink dark enough to cover this poppy field. I could have gone with brown or aged mahogany, but I wanted something bright, so this unicorn ink just fit the bill. I'm going over the leaves as well with this white ink, and then I can buff it all off. I think that one looks very pretty with the white. It almost turns pink. These panels are all 5.5 by 4.25, but I am going to cut them down. I pulled out my faux stitched dies. I love this set. I haven't used it for quite some time. So I'm going to cut out all 3 panels with this die, and it'll end up being just a little bit smaller than my A2 sized card base. So here they are all cut out. I'm going to mat these with some black cardstock from Spellbinders. This is just called Onyx. And I pulled out my little piece of scrap paper because the black cardstock gets lost on my work mat, and I can't see where to put down the panel. I want to put it down right in the middle. And I think that just looks lovely with the black matting. I'm just using my old favorite dot liner, the Kokuyo. Let me show you all 3 of them. And this is a technique that will just give you some stunning and very unique and personalized results. So let's start putting these cards together. I already went ahead and stamped out all of my sentiments onto some black cardstock using white embossing powder this time. I stamped another flower for each card just to spotlight it on this panel. And I'm using a piece of vellum that I cut out with a circle faux stitched die. And this will just help it pop out a little more from the background. I'll put a little bit of liquid adhesive behind this vellum. I popped up the flower and the sentiment with some foam pieces. And this sentiment is just so cute. It says, "You make life pop." These will be really fun cards to send out into the mail. So I'll pull off the backing. And then I'm going to tuck this sentiment behind the leaf on this flower. I cut these out partially with my paper trimmer, and then around the larger words, I used my scissors just to go around the words. Let's put this on a white top folding card base. And the card base is a little bit wider, so I will have to come back and trim off the edge of that. I'm adding some orange sequins on this panel, just 3 of them. This little touch of bling just adds a lot to this card, I think. And here is the first card all finished. But isn't that just pretty? Okay, let's put together card number 2. I sliced a little bit off of this circle vellum, and I'm going to try and cover that gap between the flowers, as you see there with the sentiment. So this is going to be a little bit higher up on the card this time. But here's my flower. I'm going to pull off the foam adhesive because I did put foam adhesive behind the sentiment. And I wanted it all to be the same height. But I'll add a little foam bit behind this flower next to the sentiment. And then I'll use a little bit of liquid glue behind it on this black cardstock just to hold it in place tight. This one says, "You popped into my mind." And I put foam adhesive behind both of these sentiment strips. I'm using some blush sequins from Pretty Pink Posh. And it's just very subtle. It almost gets lost in the pattern, but when you pick it up and it sparkles, it just is pretty. So let's attach this to the white card base. And I'll turn it over on its side this time. That way it'll be easy to trim off the edge if I need to. And here is a close-up look at card number 2. I don't know which one is my favorite. I'm really quite fond of all of them. Card number 3 is going to be similar to the first card. I'm going to put my vellum circle at the bottom and pop up the flower with some foam adhesive. I'll glue the vellum down with some liquid glue. And then this sentiment is going to say, "Popping by to say hi." And of course, more foam adhesive behind these. And then for this card, I'm going to add some black gemstones. I've had these in my stash for a while. I don't often use them, but they are really pretty. I'm going to put a little dot of liquid adhesive behind my hi sentiment just to hold that down better. And here are the black gemstones. This glue you can see on the card panel, but it will dry clear. So I will have this gorgeous stamp set listed in the description box below, as well as over at my blog. There are coordinating dies for this set, but I would highly recommend checking out the Scrappy Tails Crafts Shop. There are so many unique and beautiful stamps and dies there. I'll leave a link to the Scrappy Tails shop below in the description box as well. I hope you give this technique a try. As I said, it's one of my favorites. It's really fun to do. Thanks so much for joining me today, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful crafty day. Take care. Bye.